Robin Prouty's efforts to trace her lineage and the frustration she encountered is something many amateur genealogists can identify with. But being a descendant of slaves brings its own set of challenges. Our guest has special insights on this issue. She's Linda Sims, president of the St. Louis African American History and Genealogy Society. Linda, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I am a big fan of the PBS show, Finding Your Roots, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Before we get into the work of your organization, I'd like to know what sparked your personal interest in genealogy. I assume you've traced your family tree.
Yes.
What did you find and why did it interest you so much?
I have traced my family. I have been tracing my family since high school. So that's well over 30 plus years. My interest sparked, I was always that kid that when my other siblings would be out playing, I would be in the house, being that kid that kind of sat near the elders listening to the conversations. When we would go stay with my grandmother, her aunts lived next door, and I would just sit there and just listen to them talk. That sparked my interest. And so I would just write stuff down. Then when Roots came out, my interest peaked even more. So my family kept good records and pictures, and I love pictures. And so that kind of got me started into having an interest in tracing my family. I have traced my family back to South Carolina. Two of my branches, I've gotten back to my third great-grandparents, and that's pretty remarkable. So that's kind of got me on my journey. It's been going ever since.
So tell me a little bit about specifically, like, then you have their names. If you have their pictures, you have their names.
I have their pictures. I have my second great-grandmother, Josephine Hill. What was remarkable about her, not only was I able to obtain a photograph of her, but I was able to trace her back to Chester, South Carolina. My family, they landed in Chickasaw County in a little town called Holcomb, Mississippi. Josephine was brought there in 1850 by her slave owner, Littleton Hill. And so the Littleton Hill, they kept good records. And so I was able to find her in the will and inventory. So slaves weren't viewed as people, so they were listed among the inventory. And where I saw her listed there with a price tag next to her, with an amount next to her name. After slavery, they went into another form of servitude under the labor contracts, and seen her there listed by name. So not only do I have her picture, I have her brother's picture, and I also have traced all of our descendants down to myself.
Now that is pretty unusual because normally you don't have with records, it is so rare to have that kind of detail. And I'm sure other people who have traced their records are probably very impressed by what you've done and what you have.
Yes. A lot of people are able to trace their ancestry, but rarely do you find pictures going back that far in your lineage unless someone kept up with it. In our family, we were fortunate to keep up with the pictures. But I would say the family is impressed I'm that type of person that just keep pushing and keep looking until I get what I want. And so those answers are out there. It's a challenge, but it's out there.
But finding the country of origin, like you said, you've been able to trace your family to plantations, and that's where it stops very often. And I would imagine unless you get a DNA test trying to confirm the original country of origin, you've hit a brick wall.
I would say brick walls are somewhat of a myth. And I say that because we as African American look at the 1870 census as our brick wall, because that is the first census where you see us listed by name in a census record. However, in 1866, former slaves, the males, would have to register now to start paying poll taxes. So now you can find them in the poll tax records as before 1870. And our ancestors left footprints. So more and more records are opening up where discovery of our ancestors are available. Looking at those census records in 1870, you're looking at not only the place where your ancestor is listed, but you're looking at the whole record. Because in 1870, they didn't go very far. So you're going to find connections either to the former slave owner, or to another relative close by. And you have to study the whole census record. It's exhilarating. In addition to that, when you find a slave owner with that surname, you have the 1850 and 1860 slave schedules. They're not listed by name, just by race and age and gender. However, that is a clue as to start looking in 1870 and even as early as 1866, looking for people around that age category and just kind of research those people. And not all African Americans were slaves. Some were free people of color. So when you're researching your history, you want to look and first make sure they weren't enslaved. And once you find that they weren't enslaved, then the records are there. But if they are, then there are other record sets to dive into.
So if somebody wants to get started, they come to you, they ask for advice, where do they begin?
Start with yourself. You always start with yourself, and then you go back to your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, as far as you can go. And there's records, vital records to start with, to trace your parents, and ask questions. You want to ask questions of those ancestors that are still here, your parents, your grandparents. Don't miss that opportunity. And one of the mistakes we make is we take off looking for the deceased when the living is still here. So you want to get them so you don't miss that opportunity to trace your history. After you built your tree, then you want to dive into DNA, if that's an option for you. Dive into DNA, but that's useful after you've built your tree.
Okay, but it's a good start. And as they say, when someone dies, a library burns. So it is important to talk to people who are still here. Linda Sims, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.